All right, so welcome everyone. Therefore, I create our group. We have an amazing interview right now with a friend of mine, Chuck Neighbors, who is an author, storyteller, and actor. And we're going to get going and asking him some questions about everything he's been through. We are going to learn so much from him. He's actually been doing this a really long time. No offense, Chuck.
I'm old. An old guy.
So he's got some stuff he's going to share with us. I'm just super excited. So thank you, Chuck, for being here.
Welcome. My pleasure.
Yeah. All right, let's get into it, the nitty gritty. Well, first of all, you and I met how many years ago? I was trying to think, maybe 10?
Well, more than that. It's been quite a while.
Yeah.
Where we've known about each other. I think first connection was through David Shelton and their ministries way long time ago. So crossed paths at many different places, conferences and things like that all through the years.
Right. It's been fun getting to know you and watch you. So tell me, when did you know that you were an actor? First time?
Well, growing up in Michigan, I'm from Michigan, and growing up kind of in the church, I didn't really excel at the things that other boys were excelling at. You know, I wasn't athletic, I wasn't involved in sports, but I was very involved in my church, and we did church plays. And I got cast as one of the kids who was willing to do it. So I did plays in church growing up, and then pursued that even in middle school and high school. Began to really find like, hey, you know, this is my niche. I auditioned for some plays, got cast in lead roles, was a part of the forensics team, competitive speaking, and I did humorous interpretive reading my first year involved in that, and took second place in the state. And I began to feel like, okay, there's something to this acting thing here. So very involved, and then went on to college as a drama major, and the story unfolds from there. At the same time, growing up in the church, I felt we were a church that had altar calls every week, you know, and often had revivals, you know, week-long revivals with guest evangelists coming in, that sort of thing. And I became a Christian at a very young age. And then as a teenager, one of the things that there would be a youth night at revival. And one of the pushes would be for those who are Christians to then also accept the fact that God might be calling them into ministry. Well, as a teenager, I mean, I thought, well, that makes good sense, you know, and I kind of accepted that calling. But at the same time, I distinctly remember feeling like, I don't want to be a missionary. I don't want to be a preacher. I don't know how this is going to work itself out, but I did feel that sense of calling. And so kind of putting those two things together, I went to college as kind of a religion major, drama major, religion minor sort of thing. But the drama thing kind of took over from there. And so that's how I got into it. And, you know, it's amazing how many people, when you hear celebrities, even both in theater and music, talk about their stories. The thing that really stands out to me in so many stories is so many of these artists got their start in the church. They may have ventured far away from it now, but when you go to their beginning stories, it was often in the church where they started, and that's where my story started.
That is very interesting. I did not know that. Very interesting. Much like film actors usually get their start on stage, right? So it's kind of like
right.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so you went to college, you majored in religious studies, also drama. So when did you start your production company, and how did you know that this was going to be like making a living ministry?
Well, that comes in baby steps. My first professional acting job was while I was in college. I was involved in Smoky Mountain Passion Play, which is outdoor drama, Life of Christ. And the director of my college theater program was also the director of the Passion Play, and he cast me as his assistant and understudy to all male roles. So I learned the entire show, and it's a summer long, 6 nights a week and a matinee, so a heavy schedule all summer long. And I found out actually that that was the best job in the cast, because when you're doing a long run like that, cast members want to take nights off or they want to be sick, you know. But I would just say, hey, if you're going to be sick, give me 24 hours. But it was a really great gig, because I was playing, one night I might play just a person in the crowd, the next night I might be Judas, and the next night I might be Jesus. You know, I played everything, all the male roles. So my job didn't get boring all summer long, all those cast members. But it also prepared me for what was my next step, because learning all those roles, being, you know, the whole concept of learning the entire production. I then joined out of college. Actually dropped out of college to join a group called the Covenant Players. And they're a long-time Christian theater company based out of Los Angeles. At one time, they were the largest theater company in the world, with well over 500 actors in the company. They've dwindled down to just a skeleton crew now. But anyway, their modus operandi was a large repertoire. So they would go into a church and talk to the pastor ahead of time and say, give us a theme. And much like improv, we weren't improvising, but we had this long list of hundreds of plays. And we would try to tailor make our show to the theme the pastor gave us. So we wouldn't be doing the identical show every night of the week. We would be, and these, when I say plays, they would be anywhere from a 3-act play to as short as a 1 or 2 liner. You know, it would be more like a variety show where we might do 6 plays in an hour and a half long show. So that's kind of, and so I played hundreds of roles during my almost 10-year involvement with that company. And that's where my wife. And so we toured together, and I traveled all of the United States, went to Japan and Korea with this company. It was a great experience. But we also, for much of my, we were married, I guess, about 7 years of the 10 years that I was in the company. And we wanted to start a family, and road life was not very conducive to that. So we began to explore other options. And it was at this point where I probably had the most profound calling of God on my life. I look at calling kind of 2 different ways. There's a calling, and then there's a capital C calling, you know, if you will.
Right.
Because I do lowercase calling. I think everybody has one. Whatever your passion, whatever you like to do, I think God's wired us with a calling. It could be in the arts. It doesn't have to be in the arts. It could be in anything. But you know, if you have something that you're good at, that you enjoy doing, that you can't wait to do the next one, I think that's a calling. But then there's another kind of calling where I kind of like wrestling with God.
Yeah, that one.
And he eventually won in the wrestling match, but it was one of those things. We were at this crossroads in the company, feeling a little bit of dissatisfaction in the company, and also feeling like we wanted to start and kind of not knowing what to do next. And for me, acting is all I've ever done, all I ever wanted to do. So there wasn't like, well, I'll quit Covenant Players and go work in retail somewhere. I mean, that wasn't and part of my thinking. Plus, remember, I had this calling thing going on that I experienced as a teenager. So I felt like I've got to be true to that calling too.
Yeah, the capital C calling.
Yeah. So I remember it very distinctly. Went to bed one night and then kind of had this dream. Call it a dream, call it a vision, whatever, whatever term you like to use, but it was a very real thing where God literally, I felt, woke me up and told me to do the book of In His Steps by Charles Sheldon, the old Christian classic, where we get that phrase, what would Jesus do? To do that as a one-man show. And I'm thinking, like, where did that come from? What did I eat for dinner? You know, right. It's like, and it wasn't like I just read the book. The book wasn't on my mind. I read the book years and years ago, but it wasn't like something that was in my mind at that time. So that's kind of one of the ways I kind of felt like, oh, this is really God, you know. And I argued with God, and I had all the kinds of reasons why I couldn't do it. I enjoyed ensemble acting, being a part of a troupe, being a part of a team on stage. That's part of the fun of being an actor. Mm-hmm. And so I had all kinds of reasons why I couldn't do it, but I felt God just didn't let it go. I mean, I would keep having this over and over and over again till I finally got to a point where, in a strong voice of conviction, I said, well, God, if this is really what you want me to do, I'll try. Because I had no idea where you can start. I'd never thought of myself as a writer. I've only been an actor and a director. I've done both of those things, but I've never done any writing. And so I basically took the book and sat down with it, read it again. And as I'm reading it, it just like, oh, I know how to do this. You just cut this part, you say this part, boom, boom, boom. And I began to look at the book as a script and realized, obviously, I'm not going to do the whole book. So I needed to cut it down anyway. So editing out all of the stuff and saving a lot of the dialogue. That's how I put that together. So long story short, I resigned from Covenant Players in May of 1984, and did my first performance of In His Steps in June. So I put it together. Well, I was working on everything while I was still in Covenant Players, but and then after that first year, I did over 100 performances of that piece, and it's gone on to be, I've done now to date, hundreds into the thousands of performances of that one play. So that was how I got into doing the one-man show and making a living at it. So I have basically, through Covenant Players, really learned the ropes, so to speak, because in Covenant, you're not allowed to be just an actor in the company. You're also a tour manager, and you do your own PR. So I learned how to book shows. I learned how to change the oil in a van. I learned how to all of these other things that go with living on the road. So I was well prepared to make that leap. And I really, without losing a beat, I just went from booking shows for Covenant Players to booking shows for myself, and took off like that. So.
Wow. Well, I have seen In His Steps multiple times. It's amazing. I don't know if you've got it recorded anywhere, so maybe our friends could see it, but it's available on my website. You can actually buy a streaming copy. It went from VHS to DVD to now it's a digital file. That's how long you've been doing it. Yeah, no, it's amazing. I mean, you and I are both actors, so it's amazing when you can step on that stage and portray a character and a message with such passion, and I'm not going to spoil it for everybody, but the message is amazing. You guys need to see it. So he'll put a link in the Facebook page for us to see that. So you talked about wanting to start a family, so you decided you'd be the performer, right? And so then you guys would have children and stay home. So tell me, because you traveled, you had to, you just didn't do local churches, you traveled. How did that affect your family life, your children, raising your children and all that?
It's interesting because, when people who don't know what it takes to do this, they look at me and they see me on the road, and they don't know how in the world you could do it, but I guess what you have to understand for my wife and I, this was our normal. Traveling and performing, that was normal to us. Staying at home, that was the part that wasn't normal. Okay. But one of the things that I did not like, I grew to not enjoy when I traveled with Covenant Players, was constantly on the road, because we would leave on a tour and we'd be gone 4 to 6 months at a stretch, and we're staying in other people's homes. We sleeping on church floors. I mean, we very rarely stayed in a hotel, and I did not like that part of my lifestyle. And so when I started doing my one-man shows, I decided I'm going to change that up. I'm not going to do long tours. I'm not going to take off from home and be gone week after week. So it became more of a weekend intensive thing where I would perform on the weekends, and I would be home, and my office was in my home, and I would be at home in the middle of the week and mostly travel on weekends. And I did as much as I could close to home. And initially, my performances were all close to home. And then some things opened up where I got to travel across the country, and that opened up a lot more for me. So it got to the point where I was almost every other weekend I was on an airplane somewhere. Wow. But yeah, it was, I won't paint it as a rosy picture that it was really easy on my wife and on our family. I missed a lot of events that I regret now, not being there for certain special occasions. We always had kind of the attitude, well, we'll celebrate our birthdays, we'll celebrate these special dates and things when I'm home. But so often it wasn't on the actual date. But operating with that philosophy sometimes meant that I missed things that I shouldn't have missed. And so there were some issues and along the way there, but it wasn't a major adjustment for my wife, because we both came from touring life, so we knew what that was. So from our perspective, it was just, that was normal. That's what normal was.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that. So definitely sacrifices that you had to make. Yeah.
There were. I'm not sure we always thought about it as a sacrifice at the time, but yeah, they were.
Yeah. So you were able to raise and support a family on your income by just traveling and touring.
For the most part, yeah. Lori worked part-time. She wasn't as, how do I say this, driven to be on stage as I was. That's what I was wired to do. Lori was a little bit more of, she enjoyed it while she was in it, but she was ready to nest. She was ready to be a mom, and she didn't, she still has done performing through the years and everything, but she didn't miss it and didn't need it like I did.
Got it.
And so she worked as a secretary, and still does. But we've been blessed enough where she's worked part-time for most of the years, and for several years did not work, taking care of the kids at home. But then when she started working again, it was a part-time thing. And we've been able to mostly live off of the income that I made from traveling and performing, and use her income kind of as our retirement plan, which is now beginning to come into effect.
Right. That is amazing. And now let's talk about that, because you recently transitioned from performing full-time into something else. So let me ask you, in his steps, you did the first one June of '84. When is the last one that you did live?
The last one I did, my last performance was also in his steps, and fittingly enough, I was in August of 2019.
2019.
I took up, and at that point, I wasn't calling it quitting or retiring at that point.
Right. But
I'm going for 45 years with never more than a month without performing somewhere.
Wow.
So I was feeling, and I have a master's image I incorporated into a nonprofit, and my board, when we were discussing this, they kind of said they thought I was burnt out. I didn't want to use that phrase. I didn't feel like I was burnt out, but I definitely was not enjoying it as much. I didn't look forward to performances. And I, understand In His Steps wasn't the only thing that I did. I had a pretty full repertoire of several different pieces that I performed. Right. But I was getting to the point where this wasn't fun anymore. And I kind of felt like I'm going to take a break, maybe 6 months or a year. I can afford to do that. And so I took that break. And then, of course, we all know what happens, pandemic. And during that window, I also turned 65. And so I just decided, I'm willing to go back and perform if God's calling me to do that. But I have kind of felt like that chapter is over. And what's really weird is that I thought I would really miss it. And and there's been things, from an actor's perspective over the years, like I thought, well, I can't be part of other productions because I got to pay the bills. So I can't take 6 months off to go be in a community theater piece or a professional play somewhere else, because I got to pay the bills, So now I have time when I could do that. Well, of course, the pandemic has shut down theater.
Right. Yes, we're all feeling
but even that aside, it's like I'm not feeling that itch, and I'm okay with that, And I'm not saying I'll never perform again. Lori and I were just talking about this the other day. I got a call from a church that was wanting to know about me coming and doing that, and I bowed out. But I'm not. I might turn around and accept another offer if I can still remember the lines.
Right. I'm sure they're in there.
They are.
Yeah, you will never forget those.
That's the thing about memorization. It's like, all of those things that are tucked into your brain. And I have a Christmas play that I only do at Christmas time every year. And every year I think, oh, gee, I hope I still remember this. And it's amazing. One run through, and it's like, all those lines are still there, because they become a part of you.
Yes. And yes, our brains are an amazing creation, aren't they?
Yes.
I'm still amazed about the 45 years. Like, not many people spend that much time at one job, and you did, and enjoy. But I use the word transition because I didn't say retirement either. So tell me how, other than your board telling you it was kind of time, tell me how you got into what you're doing now, and kind of explain that.
Well, my wife, Lori, had, when I talked about retiring, 65 is young to retire for a lot of people. And I certainly don't feel like she was kind of worried. Says, so what are you going to do? Just sit around and watch TV all day now? And
Yeah.
no, but I wasn't really sure what else I was going to do. But, I was going to give myself some space to kind of figure that out. And I just kind of started kicking around some ideas for some writing projects. And to test it out, I just kind of fell into this. I started writing limericks. And limericks, as you get into studying them, they're actually like 5 lines of either a very short story in 5 lines. Mm-hmm. And so they say, write what you know. And so I know church, I know things to do with God and faith. So I wrote a little book called Get Me to the Church Around, because everything comes back. It's not, you can't read it unless you read backwards. But
no, it's straight to us.
Oh, is it straight?
Okay, it is straight to us, yes.
Get Me to the Church and Rhyme, limericks on God, faith, and the church. And I was writing these, and I was just publishing them on Facebook one at a time, and getting a lot of really interesting responses, everything from people laughing and just liking them to actually starting some really interesting conversations, because I tackled some things that were maybe just a little bit controversial with some of those. And so I ended up saying, well, shoot, I'll publish enough of these to make it into a book. So I wrote 52 limericks and published them in a book. But I also was using the book because I had other things that were more important that I wanted to publish. But I wanted to learn how to do the Amazon self-publishing thing.
Okay.
So I'll make all my mistakes on this limerick book. I'll figure out how to do it. I'll learn, use this as kind of my workshop piece.
Yeah.
And so I put the book out there, and it did okay, and it's still out there. But the thing that I really wanted to do is, I have a granddaughter who's got special needs, and she's got a syndrome called Kabuki syndrome. And I wrote a book in verse about her, where she's kind of telling her story from her point of view. And that really caught on. One of the things that and this applies to the book, but also to my career as an actor, actors can go, and even artists, you can go the traditional way of how do you make a living as an actor? Well, the traditional route is you go get in plays, you cast in plays, you find a casting agent, you get an agent, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. The other way to do that is to find an audience that needs a message and take it to them. And that's how I've made my living. It's not, I've not made a living in the traditional way an actor makes a living. I've found an audience in search of a messenger. And so if you're willing as an artist to craft your messages to that audience, there's a way to make a living. So I'm applying that same principle with this I Am Lucy book.
Yes, show us. It's beautiful.
There you go.
Yeah.
Because I found out there's not a lot of books written from the perspective of the child with the special needs. And so writing this, and then I joined, kind of being the entrepreneur that I am, I joined a lot of different groups that were focused on special needs on Facebook, letting them know about the book. Well, it caught on. I mean, it's been in the top 100 bestsellers in that category since I published it.
Wow.
And so, and the neat thing is, Tracie, is I get really incredible messages from parents and from kids too, who, parents will tell me that the kid can't go to bed at night until they read the I Am Lucy book. It's just become, because there's the main character in the story has the same symptoms that they have. So they can really identify with that character, and it helps them to feel that they're not alone, they're not the only one, that somebody understands, and it says what they want to say, that don't judge me, don't exclude getting to know me because of my symptoms, get to know who I am. And that's kind of the message of the book. And so I wrote that, then I wrote a sequel to it, Where is Lucy? And I probably have, but I also have 2 more grandkids now, so I've got to write some other books for them as well.
There you go. There you go.
And then I did other projects. I was published by Lillinus Publishing, their drama arm. I had a number of playbooks that they published. And one of the books, though, that I wrote was a drama workshop book called Drama. And they didn't market it very well. It didn't do very well. But I've had a lot of good feedback, and I felt that the book was important because it's basically how to train a group of actors in a one-day workshop kind of fashion.
Yes.
And I've been doing this workshop for forever. So I actually put it into text so that others could, using the book kind of like a teacher's guide, and conduct the workshop. So I got my rights back from Lillinus and republished that. And it's actually the best-selling book that I've got on Amazon right now. It's just Drama Workshop. It's not it's a thin little book, but it's kind of like, the nuts and bolts of what it takes to be an actor. And it's a great training resource. It's kind of written in a for dummies kind of format. So even if you're like, especially church drama ministry person who doesn't have a lot of training or background, it's a great resource to just kind of say, okay, this will help me get my actors trained and teach them the really important stuff.
Right.
So,
well, I love that one. And because when you first came out with it, you sent it along to me. So because I do teach workshops too. I haven't recently, but it is, if you guys need something like that, it's super easy to follow, basic step by step. You'll look like you've been doing it forever if you follow it. Yeah.
And then the next big project, I've been, teaching, well, back up here. I've had some invitations from some other ministries to come in and teach, how I do the make a living as an artist thing.
Yes.
And I can't tell you, Tracie, over the years, how many other artists, both brand new, just out of the gate, just getting started, as well as veteran people who've been doing this forever, call me up. And their big question is, because I have a reputation, as we've already pointed out, 45 years with hardly more than a month without performing somewhere. They want to know, how in the world do I keep myself booked? How do I do this?
Right.
And so I end up giving, 2-hour phone calls to artists, just kind of walking them through it. I get invitations to speak at different worship conferences and other things to teach this sort of thing. And I got an invitation to put together kind of an online course. And I said, well, if I'm going to do that now at this stage in my life, I'm going to write the book first. I'm going to take all of this stuff that I've been kind of just regurgitating over and put it together in a book. And so I did. And I called it Church Pews, Potlucks, and a Tank of Gas. And if you're a artist, you know exactly what all of that refers to. And so I put, I kind of coupled it. It's a little bit of my story, kind of a little bit memoir of my years, 45 years doing this, along with just a lot of the nuts and bolts, the how-tos. How do I book shows? How do I, travel tips and all kinds of things that I've put together over the years. And so that one's out there, but it hit at the time of COVID when artists aren't doing much right now. So it hasn't actually sold well, but I'm hoping that as things begin getting back to normal, that book will give it a little bit of revived interest.
Yes, as people are allowed to move about
Right.
and do their thing. Yes. Oh, so exciting. Okay, so before we get to your most recent book, I'm intrigued by the fact that you started with limericks and then the Lucy books and that kind of thing. And I know that the 2 drama books, either the Making a Living, the Tanks, Pews, and Tank of Gas, Potluck, that one, and the drama workshop, those are all things that you knew, you just took them out and put them on paper.
Right.
Took them. And where do you get your inspiration for the other ones? The limericks, were you just walking around your house one day and all of a sudden the limerick came out? You're like, oh, I should write that down. Or, and then talk to
I
me.
would say there's two processes going on here. I'm still reluctant to embrace the label of writer, author.
I wonder about that. Why?
But it took me a long time to really understand that I'm an artist too. So I'm a little slow learner in that regard.
Okay, right.
But when I would write something, and I've written a ton of sketches over the years, but my process was more like improvisation. I didn't take writing courses. I couldn't teach you a writing course. If I taught you a writing course, it would be an improv course.
Yes.
Just what comes next and understanding, yes and principle. A lot of the things that if you know improv are part of the formula and what makes an improvisation work. And so with many of these things, and when I would write sketches, it would be like, okay, again, the idea of serving my audience, rather than, I've not done a lot of writing of this is what Chuck wants to write. I've been more like, here's a need that somebody needs writing for, so I write for that need.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of my sketchbook books that were published were improvisational. I would be like, okay, well, something for Easter, something for Good Friday, something for the church calendar, family relationships, commitment in the church. You pick a topic, you pick a theme, much like in Covenant Players. Even they would give us a theme and we would try to design a program theme. So that's the way I'm wired to create. So with the limericks, it would be like, okay, I'm going to write limericks. I started with denominations. It's like, oh, what would be a good limerick for Baptists? What would be a good limerick for Presbyterians? What would be I would find something that is distinctive about a particular group, and then just do a lot of wordplay. And I have a cheat sheet. Basically, there's a website called Rhyme Zone, and I go to that website and I just type in, okay, I got to find 3 rhyme with this. And then I look down the list of, okay, these are the words I can fashion into the limerick. So that's how I would do the limericks. And so the Lucy books were a lot the same sort of thing. It's like I knew what I wanted to say. And so it's a matter of making it fit into some kind of rhyme or verse or whatever. And then my newest book, the one that you were talking about, it's actually, I'm cheating. I'm taking some of my sketches and things that I've written in the past and thinking, wonder if any of these could work as a children's book or whatever. And so the Rescue of Jonathan Doe, which is the thing that I just published, is actually a reader's theater piece that was called Celebration City. It's really not a kid's story, but I put it together in more of a fairy tale kind of format. But if you could see the original, it's got choral parts and it's meant for like 8 readers to tell this story.
Wow. I had no idea it started like that.
So I've made a short list of some of the sketches that I've written in the past. I thought this could work as a story, as a play, not just a play, but as a short story for kids or whatever. So I've got a few other things in the queue that I'm going to do that kind of treatment to.
Oh, so excited for that. I love what God has done in you, the way you're wired. I think we all as believers should be wired that way, but you see the need and then you cater to that need, which is Jesus, right? I mean, that's what he did. So, right. Following in his footsteps, basically. And I think all of us artists who have whatever the gift is, if we could be others focused, I think the Lord's just going to download and give, what we need. You were going to say something?
Well, that's the thing, one of the ways that I've been able to make a living at this over the years is to kind of flip the traditional model on its head, and it's the thing that unfortunately I found, I've talked about all those phone calls that I would get from artists, saying, how do you do this? Most of I would say 90% of the artists that I talked to didn't want to hear what I had to say. Because what artists want to hear is, you're such a good actor. We can't wait to have you perform for us. And, they have this idea of that I'm an actor, that I just get to go out there and act. Well, if you really crunch the numbers in terms of a 40-hour work week, I act, a typical week would be me acting for 1 or 2 hours, my time on stage. And the rest of my week, which is usually more than 40 hours, I was a booking agent, I was a bookkeeper, I was a travel planner, and all the other things that go into making the job work, correspondence. And so there's so much more to it. And artists don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear that, oh, you got to do all these other things, It's like people in any job, you may say, pick a professional lawyer, a doctor, whatever. You may like the idea of helping people as a doctor, but you also realize doctors have paperwork to do. They have reports to file. They have education to keep up on. They don't get to be just a doctor serving a patient, 24 hours a day. The same with any profession. And if you take it to the next level, look, actors in Hollywood, unless they are super famous and super rich, they're only employed until the next gig. They get booked a movie and they get booked on stage for a show, but when that show is over, they're back to auditioning again. They're back to marketing themselves, and that's the hard nut to swallow for a lot of artists. Is they don't get to be just the artist.
Right. Do you ever find, just a few more questions, but this is so fascinating to me. I'm learning a lot about you that I didn't know. So do you ever, I know you don't want to call yourself a writer, but what do you ever struggle with writer's block, or do you try to force anything, or just when you get the idea, you go for it?
Yeah, I do. I tend to be kind of driven once I latch onto a project. So writer's block for me is more like going weeks and months even without an idea.
Mm-hmm.
Then once I get the idea, it's like I'm consumed by it, and I can't do anything else but that until I get it all out on paper or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a streak of laziness in me now. I think at this stage in my life too. It's like I don't have to do this stuff to pay the bills, and so I want to do it because I want to do it. I want to do it for the joy of it, of creating. And so if I'm not feeling motivated, then it's okay to take a step back from it and do things around the house. Right.
I think you've earned that rest. I missed that. I was talking over you. What did you say?
I'm sorry. To become the handyman that I've never been very good at,
There you go. There you go. Oh gosh, this is so exciting. So we have all your books. You're gonna help us find those in the group. You're gonna send us links to that. Let me think about anything else I wanted to ask you before the final question, which I am super excited to ask you. But is there anything you want to share before I ask you?
No, let's
creme de la creme. All right. So professional, believing, Jesus-loving artist of 45 years plus. What is one piece of advice you would give other people like you? Love Jesus, maybe just starting or maybe in the middle. It's up to you. What is your nugget?
Well, this is probably cliche, and I'm sure everybody's probably heard this before, but I really believe it's true. That we talked about calling before, and the cliche thing is don't do it unless you're called. But if you're called, do it no matter what. Mm-hmm. I've talked to so many artists over the years. I have a few other artists that work with my ministry, Steve Weiland and Marsha Whitehead, very good performers as well. And there's been others that have come and gone through the years, and some that have looked at, I've kind of said, hey, you could be an artist with Master's Image. I've done a lot of the work for you. I could bring you into my nonprofit and help set you up to do this kind of work. But so many of them, once they realize what's involved, realize, well, maybe this isn't their thing, but it's got to be a calling. You have to be called to do this, because you're not going to do it for the money. Yeah, I've made a living at it, but I'm not rich. And if I had been able to make it, most artists don't do it for the money. They do it, because that's what makes them tick. It's what they're driven. It's their passion. And so if you feel that God is calling you to do this, the thing that these other artists have often told me is, well, I'm going to go get a job to pay the bills. And when I get to a certain financial place, then I'm going to do what you're going to do. And believe me, I was given that advice when I started out. There were some respected business people that I said, how do I do this? And their standard advice was, don't try to make a living at it yet. Just go get a job and just do this on the side. I knew myself well enough to know that if I didn't dive in and do it full time, I wouldn't do it. And so I guess it's if you are called to trust that conviction that God has called you, and don't look back. It's jump into the deep end. Do whatever it takes, but if that's what God's called you to do, then do it.
Wow, you're speaking right to me. I don't think anybody else needs to watch this recording. So right to me. So, oh my goodness, thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's what makes us tick. It's, if we're called to do it, go for it, and don't look back, and dive into the deep, jump into the deep, whatever, right? Oh, well, Chuck, thank you so much for your time. Thank Lori for letting us have you. And although I've never met her personally, tell her hi. I have not, no.
I'll have to fix that.
Yeah, I know. So you're in Oregon, you're not too far away. So next time you're up this way, you won't be performing necessarily, but if you're ever up Seattle way, make sure you look me up. Okay. Thank you, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed Chuck, and he's going to be posting on the Facebook page how to get a hold of all of his books, and probably open for some questions. Would you be open for some questions, Chuck? If people...
Happy to do that.
Because we have some writers who are just starting out. A couple have been published and a couple are dabbling. So
okay.
All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Bless you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.